lead to this sort of consequence and result?
It's very unusual. In all the cases I've heard of, and all the studying I've done, the reading I've done about cases, being a genealogy nut for years, I've never heard of anything like this. And that's what was so shocking about it, because the implications were that the child being missing had to have had something to do with the murder. And to realize 40 years later, oh my gosh, this child's been possibly, in the company of somebody that killed her parents.
Wow.
So it's a very unusual case, very unique.
Yeah. Allison Peacock, thank you for sharing. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now, welcome to a bonus
on Culinary Journeys. Meet Japan's
Don Lemon is off tonight. Now, on the heels of the first comprehensive look at the January 6th committee's findings, the Justice Department has just released brand new video from the riot at the Capitol. Now, I warn you, this is graphic video, and it does include strong language.
Get him! Get him! Get these motherfuckers! We're coming through! We're coming through! We want our country back! Ah! Ah!
For nearly a year, the January 6th committee has been trying to piece together how this happened, different vantage points, who was involved, from the bottom to the top. And last night, they unveiled some new video of its own and concerning findings in its very first public hearing.
President Trump was yelling and, quote, really angry at advisors who told him he needed to be doing something more. And aware of the rioters' chance to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence, quote, deserves it.
Wow. Well, what the American people deserve are answers and information and the truth. And of course, the people who fought to defend our Capitol that day, well, they deserve it as well. And among them, former D.C. Metropolitan Police Officer Mike Fanone, who is now a CNN law enforcement analyst. I want to get his take on the hearing that happened just last night. Michael Fanone, I'm glad that you're here, and you are precisely who we want to hear from, because you were there. We remember the battle. We remember what was described even last night, to refresh our memory, as if we had forgotten about the mortal hand-to-hand combat. And I want to know, what was your take? How did you think the hearing on the first day went? Do you think people have more insight into what really happened?
I mean, I think it was a good foundation, a good start. I mean, I always revert back to my time in law enforcement. I mean, you were a prosecutor, you know, this was a great opening statement. What I'm looking for in the future is for the Select Committee to build on that. I mean, they've done a good job so far, at least in my opinion, of lining up the activities of January 6th and the days leading up to it, and specific statements that were made, not just by Trump, but also by those in his inner circle, and what was, you know, partially his thought process, but also those around him pertaining to the results of the 2020 election.
You know, I want to know the idea of the questions that you have in particular. We know the law enforcement collectively outmanned, overrun. We know, we saw this. I mean, you know it intimately. What do you want answered? Your vantage point was what none of us really had, being right there. You saw this unfolding. What are the questions you're looking to, even outside of what the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States was doing? Do you have questions about how this could have happened in the first place in terms of intelligence failures or security protocols? What are your questions?
Yeah, I mean, civil disturbance was never my forte. I spent most of my time in narcotics, but I don't need to be an expert in civil disturbance to tell you that this was a catastrophic failure of planning and preparation. And, you know, that's not to criticize the individual officers that responded.
Right.
I mean, it was in spite of their leadership that they were able to hold the line at the Capitol. You know, I'm not a cop anymore. but I certainly shed my fair share of blood at the Capitol that day. And I think that U.S. Capitol Police leadership owes it to their officers and to the agencies that responded that day to assist, to be transparent in their failures and also to show some accountability. I mean, quite frankly, there are people in leadership positions within that agency that have absolutely no business leading men and women in situations like that. They should be removed.
You know, and I'm hopeful that we're going to have the clarity that you're talking about and the transparency and light as that antiseptic. But I also wonder, and you and I know Washington, D.C. very well, and there's this phrase about things that are happening inside the Beltway and what concerns those who are inside the Beltway versus those who are outside. Do you have concerns that the audience who is watching, this sort of the jury of the American electorate, do you think it's getting to where it needs to be? Do you think that this is translating in a way that you're not just preaching, by you, I mean the committee, not just preaching to the choir, but trying to have a broader tent? You think it's going to get through?
I mean, in all honesty, no, I do not. I think that, at this point, our country is too polarized in its politics. People are, for the most part, incredibly entrenched on their side of the political aisle. And there's very few people left in the middle who are open to, negotiation. But I don't think that the American people necessarily is the only audience that the Select Committee is or should be addressing. I think ultimately, I said last night that the Department of Justice is the last line of defense when it comes to our democracy.
Well, we will see if they indeed will hold that line in particular. Michael Fanone, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me.
I want to bring in Ron Brownstein and Van Jones to talk about how these hearings played out and get some reaction from them as well. Gentlemen, you heard Michael Fanone just now. We've been watching him. We saw what happened on that day. There were others, many others, who we watched in horror as to how they valiantly tried to fend off this crowd of people. When you hear him wondering about whether it's going to translate and being really definitively saying he doesn't think that it'll overcome the entrenchment, I wonder, from your perspective, Ron, I'll go to you first, do you think he's right?
Well, first of all, I think that the committee, to a degree that I don't think has been fully appreciated today, is reframing the whole question, Laura. I mean, what we've been debating mostly for the 18 months is what role did Donald Trump's words on that day and his tweets play in summoning the mob and directing them toward the Capitol, and the attack on the Capitol itself has been the central issue. The committee reframed the question that Americans have to be asking, because they framed the attack on the Capitol as just one component of a larger attack on the democracy. I mean, they made very clear that in their view, the attack on the Capitol, that it was the final stage of a 7-stage effort to overturn the election and to subvert American democracy. And that I was struck as well by the repeated language particularly from Representative Cheney, that what Trump did was not only wrong, not only in the broad sense a violation of his oath of office, but that it was illegal. And so I think they were both paving a path and pointing a finger at the Attorney General in terms of making very clear that this was a multifaceted plot to try to subvert the election result, and that there's legal culpability there. And so, look, there aren't that many people who can be moved in the country, but the parties are really closely divided. So it really doesn't take that many to matter. And that's like kind of one lane, public opinion. The other lane is the legal lane. And I think they've laid out a much broader and even more consequential indictment, broadly speaking, against the president, the former president, than we've heard so far.
Van, I want you to weigh in here because it's interesting. The second impeachment hearing, as you all know, was really about whether the words were incendiary, whether they were inciting the insurrection. Now it's more about this 7-part plan they've spoken about, the idea of, and there was a statement made that, look, on the morning of January 6th, President Donald Trump intended to remain the president of the United States. And we're seeing the way they have framed the discussion. When you were listening, though, Van, and you very early on were one of the people to predict Donald Trump's victory when he first ran, because you were having your pulse, your thumb on the pulse of what people were thinking, even outside of the box. What do you make of their presentation and its ability to sway?
If anyone listened to Liz Cheney in particular, she did an extraordinary job of laying out just how diabolical, the methodology. We were facing democracy hanging by a thread, and that thread is still unraveling. And so the problem is the people who most need to hear from her won't listen. That's the big tragedy, that you have a Cheney, Liz Cheney, daughter of Dick Cheney. But this family is a pillar of American conservatism. And yet the conservative movement will not listen to them as she is begging for American democracy to survive and begging for people to look in the eyes of a coup attempt that played out.
And by the way, Van, looking into the eyes of her own party, I want you to respond, because I want you to hear this, remind the people about what Congresswoman Liz Cheney spoke of. She's obviously in a very vulnerable position now in Wyoming. It's no guarantee that she will retain her seat. In fact, it looks like a very uphill battle. But here's what she said about the legacy of those who essentially won't listen.
In our country, we don't swear an oath to an individual or a political party. We take our oath to defend the United States Constitution. And that oath must mean something. Tonight, I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.
Van, is that the moment?
That's what. Sorry. Yeah. That's it. I mean, that's powerful stuff. I mean, if you study the American conservative movement as I do and as I have, if you had told anybody even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that the Cheneys would be standing against the entire conservative movement, saying that an obvious coup attempt is a coup attempt and wouldn't be listened to, it would be hard to imagine. And the dereliction of duty on the part of this president, can you imagine if there had been 10,000 Muslims that attacked our Capitol in the middle of a joint session of Congress? This wasn't on the weekend. This is a joint session of Congress. And the President of the United States, what would Trump have done? He would have instantly had a response. If it had been Black Lives Matter, if it had been 10,000 Smurfs, it had been 10,000 anything attacking. This is not somebody, Donald Trump, who's afraid to use force. He wanted Black Lives Matter activists shot down in the streets. And so the idea that somehow this rough, tough president that likes to knock heads together and says you need to punch people is somehow for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours has nothing to say about the American Capitol being attacked, and yet he's not a part of the coup. And the idea that he's going to continue to be an unindicted co-conspirator in the face of this, I think, is also shocking. But Liz Cheney, no matter what happens to her electorally, has secured a place in history as a true profiling courage.
Ron, I mean, the invoking of the idea of the unindicted co-conspirator for our audience, of course, is reminiscent of what happened with Michael Cohen and the idea of, will this person be named? There was a lot made about the Proud Boys last night and the discussion surrounding their planning, their strategizing. A documentarian testified as well. This was all in prime time. The future hearings may not all be in prime time. What do you make of the ability to not only retain the attention, but to have it for a sustained pace and sustained period of time for the American public?
Well, look, there's a very different world than Watergate, when there were fewer options for people, and everyone pretty much was drinking from the same fountain in terms of the information they were getting. So obviously, it's going to be more diffuse. I am less pessimistic than some that there is no audience that is willing to hear this. I mean, it is true that, roughly 40 or 45% of Republican voters say that they essentially only listen to conservative media. But there is a piece, there's a quarter of the Republican electorate that does not echo the big lie, that says even a little more than that, that said that they do use mainstream media sources. And I think the quality and the quantity of the evidence that is being put forward is going to, be a challenge for them. Big movement is not possible anymore in American public opinion, but small movement can have big impact. And I don't think this is a big, factor in the 2022 election. Midterms are a snapshot on the condition of the country, and inflation dominates everything. But the question of whether Americans want to trust Donald Trump with executive power and the nuclear codes and control of federal law enforcement after all of this, I think it's too early to say that this will have no effect. I will say one last point about Liz Cheney. She said the verdict of history will be on those Republicans. I think that's putting it a little too far into the future, Laura, because not only are so many Republicans looking away from what happened, they're moving in the opposite direction. They're operationalizing the big lie and the coup with the laws in the states making it harder to vote, with laws in the states that are making it easier for partisan, meddling in the tabulation of the results, and with advocates of the big lie running for control of election positions in virtually every swing state that will decide 2024. So, this is happening here and now, and the party really has to decide how far it is willing to go in trying to undermine the basic pillars of democracy. And second, what will the public do if they don't?
Well, that's the point. The question was, or statement was, it's a republic if you can keep it. They tried to, I'll give you the last word here, Van, they really tried to hone in the notion that this was a continuing threat. It wasn't just a retrospective look into history. It was about trying to ensure that this was not a dry run. Did they make that case to at least frame the conversation for the American public to know this continues?
Yeah. Look, for the people who are watching, I think that's what should come away from. That's why your blood runs cold. It's not just the seeing the violence, is recognizing this was a massive plot, and none of the people who were behind that plot are in jail. In fact, they are still out there plotting right now, and that's very frightening.
Ron Brownstein, Van Jones, thank you for joining me. I will note, of course, that the DOJ has prosecuted or at least charged more than 800 people, but we'll see where all that meets out. Now to the investigation in Uvalde. A lot of excuses from law enforcement as to why it took so long to confront the active shooter killing children and teachers. Now we are finally hearing more from the school police chief in charge that day. He now says he didn't know he was in charge. We'll unpack with the responding officer who led the initial entry into Sandy Hook Elementary next.
On Culinary Journeys, meet Japan's Natsuko Shoji, a chef earning rave reviews. Inspired by art, she is a rising star in French cuisine and in an industry where men dominate. See how she overcame life's challenges despite the odds and is now paving the way for a new generation. Culinary Journeys, Sunday on CNN, in association with Ajinomoto.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley. Weekdays on CNN.
I always believe in karma. I believe that doing the right thing will always end up to making us even more money. Our goal is to shape a better and more sustainable food future by investing in early stage transformative technology startups to address the challenges that the food supply chain that we're facing. So we have been backing alternative protein solutions in many different forms, from the cell culture meat, fermentation-based protein, plant-based meat, plant-based dairy. First, you need to make those meatless food really tasty. And second layer is it also needs to taste like meat. So we largely look at precision agriculture. We're looking at ag-drone company, ag robotics that can help the small farmers to make smarter decisions on growing their crops to provide a better and more sustainable impact on the environment.
June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
Nearly 3 weeks since 19 children and 2 teachers were killed in a Texas elementary school, the Uvalde police chief is finally giving his first detailed account on why it took 77 minutes for officers to confront the gunman. According to the Texas Tribune, Chief Pete Arredondo told reporters that there was no way to breach the classroom's steel enforced doors. They had to wait for keys. Now, in the meantime, he did what he could. He told officers to break windows of other classrooms to evacuate teachers and kids. He called for tactical gear, a sniper, and keys to get inside. And when those keys arrived, he tried dozens of them, but none of them worked. And despite all of this, Arredondo maintains that he never considered himself the scene's incident commander, saying, quote, "I didn't issue any orders. I called for assistance and asked for an extraction tool to open the door." Now, his belief was that someone else had taken control of the larger response, and he was just a frontline responder. I guess in perspective now from Chief Christopher Vangeli, who was the first responding officer to the Sandy Hook school shooting. Chief, I'm glad you're here. I do want to play for you a quick clip of a conversation that I had with a reporter from the Tribune who was talking about that idea of being an incident commander or not truly being it. Let's listen in.
When the gunman was able to get inside the classroom, that is when Arredondo says sort of the situation gets flipped and it becomes very difficult for law enforcement to get inside, break down the door as people have suggested. And now the shooter is inside, very safe with potential victims. And that's what caused the delay.
Chief, what do you make of that? I mean, the idea of not only him saying he didn't think he was an incident commander, but just the explanation for why there was that delay. What's your reaction?
Thank you, Laura. I did read the chief's interview, and I have to say I'm even more confused now that I've read it. The fact that he said he intentionally left his communication gear behind his radio just doesn't make any sense as an excuse. Also, the fact he went in there without a bulletproof vest also tells me that this is somebody that is totally unprepared to handle any situation, which is strange, being that his only job is to be a school officer, and he has a 6-man department, and he only has a certain number of schools he has to patrol. So the fact that he didn't have that equipment and he did not have a key, a master key to get into every single room, just is unbelievable. As far as the steel doors,
I ran the public, though, he is now, I believe, a city councilman. So there's additional responsibilities in addition to what he once was. But the idea of the barricaded doors, I know you're going there in that direction right now, because we heard initially, and you and I had this conversation about this being a barricade situation or an active shooter. And you and I saw this timeline. In fact, the timeline that's partially now been confirmed that gives us some of what happened on that occasion. There's still this huge delay and this question of if there were still shots being fired, how could it be thought of as a barricade? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it definitely was not a barricaded subject. Once that there were shots fired and we knew that this person was in a school building and especially inside of a school classroom, right then tells you it's a active shooter and that active shooter has to be taken down. I don't know why, they talk about the door. The door was probably the exact same door that was there when the school was built. It's probably a sturdy door due to fire codes. And of course, it's a commercial building, so it has to have a steel casing around it. So it's going to be a sturdier door than you would find in most homes. However, I don't know why he said it wasn't breachable. Did he try? Did they throw a couple officers against it to see what would happen? The other interesting point is that in one of the interviews that one of the survivors gave, she talked about how the shooter shot through the window in the door. So we do know now that there were actually windows in those doors that could be shot through. And so why they didn't try any number of different types of assaults and plans to try to shoot that shooter is unbelievable, especially since there were more officers there than just his own department. I'm very surprised.
We heard
that
from some of those
officer,
officers, though, Chief. Excuse me. We heard from some of those officers. In fact, we've got some body cam audio, and listen in to what conversations were actually happening out in the hallway. It really, it's foreboding, really. Do we have that clip of them talking about what they were hearing? Well, since we don't have it, I'll just describe it. And it's the notion of at one point them saying, "Hey, if there are kids in there, we've got to go in." Another saying that, "Look, we have to wait and see who gives us the direction." I'm paraphrasing the aspect of it. The idea of waiting the direction. Well, if there was no incident commander, if there was no sort of chef in the kitchen, so to speak, I mean, what do you do?
Yeah. Well,
the New York Times.
There's a lot of confusion about what an incident commander is. The incident commander is the person who takes charge outside of the hot zone. Their complete job is logistics. They run that whole show. They handle everything from media to finances to incoming departments and where they should stage. The person that's actually in there dealing and going to breach the door, that person is just part of your initial strike force. Still, that officer, if he was that chief, if he was the highest ranking person in that hallway, then yes, he was in charge. There's no doubt about it. I'm just surprised that officers from the state police or the sheriff's departments that had rank didn't basically just step over him and take on the responsibility of going in the door. Why they listened to him is beyond my comprehension.
Well, we're waiting. If you're confused, imagine what the laymen of all of us think about this very notion as well, and the families who are grieving and want the answer so desperately. Chief Vangeli, thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Now, to some other victims who also deserve answers. U.S. gymnasts who've been failed on so many fronts. Sexually abused by the longtime doctor for the U.S. women's gymnastics team. Dozens of them are now seeking damages from the FBI, including star Olympians like Simone Biles and Allie Reisman, accusing the agency of mishandling their case. And you're about to hear from their attorney. Next.
When you dream more, you need to move more. With over 45% of sub-Saharan Africa using mobile money, innovative digital payment solutions are giving people financial freedom. Access FacePay uses AI to make transactions more secure and accessible for over 31 million customers. Access. More than banking.
Egypt is diversifying its energy mix and extending its pioneering strategy to every part of the country. Through working in partnerships, Egypt aims to provide 42% of its electricity from renewable energy by 2035. The country is successfully transitioning to more sustainable sources, creating green jobs, and powering a more sustainable future.
when we decide we want to rise up and do something, when we come to connect with and care about each other and think, now I want to do something about what's happening with them and human trafficking around the world. My name is Sarah Davison Tracy. I'm an author, and I just published a book called No Longer Untouchable, a story of human trafficking, heroism, and hope. I wrote the book over the last 7 years in collaboration with 5 young women, 4 of whom were trafficked out of Nepal into India. Devi Sarahana Bhatti is one of our 5 storytellers. She has been a leader. She has been a visionary for this book, but also for her people in Nepal.
I have 1 brother and 5 sisters. One sister, she was sold out into brothels in India when she was very little. So it was very long time, my parents and we were looking for her. But there was a big challenge for us how to rescue her, how to, get her back to Nepal.
I wrote this book with the hope and the dream that these stories would elevate these young women's voices and would bring freedom to the many, many millions who are not yet free.
This is the Innovation Center, right?
Indeed.
Okay.
Where the magic happens. So what you're going to be going through now is an experience zone built with the end user's journey in mind. So
Akshay Chopra heads the Innovation Center at Visa's newly opened regional headquarters in Dubai. I'm taking a seat. This is for me.
This is all yours.
Thank you very much. Overseeing 90 markets from Europe to Asia.
You can take any surface like a bus stop, a metro station, turn it into a well-stocked retail store.
And let's just say, it's pretty cool, turning everyday bores and chores into a digital delight. This is actually a really good first take, don't you think? Add to cart.
We want to make it easier for people to pay, get paid. We work with governments, with fintechs, with banks, with merchants of all shapes and sizes to help build payment experiences that are more convenient, more seamless, and more secure.
In a region where cash is king, Akshay says the global pandemic accelerated the move to digital.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Some of the most famous gymnasts in the world are seeking legal damages of more than $1 billion from the FBI. They're survivors of convicted sex offender Larry Nassar, the former doctor for USA Gymnastics, Olympic gold medalist Michaela Maroney. She accused the FBI of botching its investigation into Nassar when she spoke before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Listen.
What is the point of reporting abuse if our own FBI agents are going to take it upon themselves to bury that report in a drawer? They had legal, legitimate evidence of child abuse and did nothing.
Now, last month, the DOJ declined to prosecute 2 former FBI agents accused of mishandling the agency's 2015 investigation into Nassar. The agents were accused by the DOJ's watchdog office of making false statements, which the FBI Director Christopher Wray called gross misconduct. Joining me now is Alex Cunney, an attorney for Maroney, Simone Biles, and Ali Reisman. You know, I'm very glad you're here, Alex. I want to just clarify something because the headlines for some might read there's a lawsuit. This actually isn't a lawsuit. The way it works under the Federal Tort Claims Act, you have to first give notice about the opportunity to or intention to sue, and then they have to have about a 6-month period before you have to actually either settle the case or they can decline to engage in that. So right now, you are at a state where you have given notice. How do you see this playing out, though?
We filed the tort claims. They have 6 months to respond to those, to evaluate them. And we don't know what they're going to do. I think that's what's been shown through this process is we don't know what the DOJ is going to do. When our clients reported to the FBI, they expected a certain result to come of that. And they were grossly, grossly disappointed, as you could hear from Michaela's testimony. So we don't know what the result is going to be. They have 6 months to respond to either attempt to evaluate the claims, to settle them, or to deny them. And we will react to whatever they choose to do.
You know, one thing we do know is they're not going to criminally prosecute those FBI agents. We know there was a declination to prosecute. What do you make of that decision?
It's outrageous. It's simply outrageous. We have a report from the Inspector General's office indicating that these agents engaged in misconduct, concealed evidence, and ultimately allowed Larry Nassar to return to Michigan State and sexually abuse dozens of others. So the idea that that can happen and nobody's criminally charged for it is simply outrageous.
Now, ultimately, your clients are seeking a monetary amount, but I do wonder, I know just from hearing their riveting testimony, the power of their words and that lingering question of what is the point? I mean, just the idea, I have prosecuted so many delayed sexual reporting cases and talking to victims and survivors of this abuse. And we encourage people to report because we hope there will be accountability and justice to be doled and meted out. What, for your clients, how will they define accountability and justice here? It's not just about the number.
No, it's certainly not just about the number. What accountability looks like is understanding what happened. Last summer, we got the report from the Inspector General's office, and it gave us a lot of the who, a lot of the what, a lot of the when, and finally gave some of those answers. But the most important question that our clients want answered is why? Why did this happen? Why did highly trained FBI agents who presumably have handled cases like this before, why did they botch this so horrifically? And that's what this is about. It's understanding why this happened. And these women have come forward, going on nearly 7 years ago now. And all they wanted is their voice to be heard, and they wanted to know why their complaints weren't acted upon. So, money aside, that is the most important thing, is getting to the bottom of what happened so little girls in the future don't have to go through what they went through.
At any time, and I don't mean to suggest that this would by any stretch be enough, but at any time, has anyone stepped up to the plate and offered some semblance of an apology, some offer of an explanation of the why, helped to try to convey some sentiment? Has any of that happened? I mean, I've heard from them. We've heard the decision not to prosecute. Have they ever had anyone take the time to at least recognize on this level that they were heard?
I think there was a step taken by the testimony provided to Congress, but these women have heard lip service from numerous organizations, from USA Gymnastics, from Michigan State, and they're hearing the same things from the FBI. Recently, they've been quiet, but what they want is those answers, and what they want are real answers to the questions that linger in their mind about how these girls who came after them could have been prevented this horror that they suffered.
Alex Honey, thank you so much. We will continue to follow this really important story.
Thank you, Laura.
We turn now to a health crisis for one of pop music's biggest stars.
As you can see, this eye is not blinking. I can't smile on this side of my face.
And that is not all Justin Bieber is dealing with tonight. The condition now keeping him off stage for the foreseeable future. We'll try to walk through it next.
I'm Paula Hancock in Seoul. This is CNN.
I'm Barry Hurst, Energy and Sustainability Director at Schneider Electric. Schneider Electric was ranked the world's most sustainable company in 2021 by Corporate Knights, and it drew a lot of attention to what we've been working on now for over 10 years. So I think the important thing to emphasize is that it's a long-term commitment and that it takes a lot of organization to really make big strides. So the advice I would give is do strategy and action in parallel. We see a lot of companies who have a strategy but are unsure on how to implement it, and we see companies that want to get action but don't have a clear strategy. So I would say always do the two in parallel if you want to get maximum impact and really accelerate your journey.
We're here now at the home of one of the FSB team, and my name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
It's just been a chaotic scene here.
People are so exhausted. Just gonna help her carry this bag.
We were just in the hospital. It was shocking. Why do you think India has been hit so badly? Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy.
Why does a small group of women asking for their right to be educated threaten you so much?
Raise your hand if you love school.
I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you.
You can hear gunshots every couple minutes. Now they're pressing in. They want desperately to tell their story.
Justin Bieber says he's recovering tonight after his surprising announcement. But the Grammy winner telling fans on social media he's canceled a series of shows to fight a rare disorder. It's called Ramsay-Hunt syndrome.
As you can see, this eye is not blinking. I can't smile on this side of my face. This nostril will not move. So there's full paralysis in this side of my face.
So, what exactly is Ramsay Hunt syndrome? Let's ask Dr. Peter Hotez. He's a professor at the Baylor College of Medicine. Dr. Hotez, I'm glad you're here. For many people, they've never heard of this particular affliction. What is it? How does it start? How do you get this?
Well, he's showing signs of facial paralysis on one side of the face. And the most common cause of that is what's called Bell's palsy, which can occur after Lyme disease or even after a viral infection like COVID-19. A somewhat less common cause is Ramsay Hunt syndrome, which is actually reactivation of the chickenpox virus. So it's actually a form of what's called herpes zoster that more typically occurs in older individuals and will often manifest as a band of vesicles of virus and pain around their midsection. But in some cases, that form of herpes zoster can affect the facial nerve and be associated with a lot of facial pain, ear pain, and then that's followed by a rash, a vesicular rash of the appearance of what looks like chickenpox vesicles on the ear, and then facial paralysis. I didn't in the video. Of course, the resolution is not great. I don't see the chickenpox vesicles, but that you might see with it. But you don't always have to have that. So presumably, he's been diagnosed by a physician, and usually you do recover. Sometimes it can take several weeks or months before that happens. The older you are with it, it's more common to see this in 60 to 70-year-olds. The less likely you are to have a full recovery, but hopefully as a young, healthy guy, he'll do okay with it, but it could take some time.
And I should note, you have not treated him at all. You are not his medical provider. But I do wonder about the Bell's palsy as well, because it piqued my interest when you spoke about COVID-19 and other symptoms as well, or other illnesses. What are the distinctions between what you're seeing with this idea of Ramsay Hunt syndrome compared to, say, a Bell palsy?
Well, there is overlap, and the two can look similar, and sometimes it presents a diagnostic dilemma. Usually with Bell's palsy, it's less severe. 90% of the cases resolve, and I think the big differentiator is much less pain, and not associated with a characteristic rash, the appearance of vesicles. So that's just looking at his video, I guess that's one possibility. But presumably, he didn't come up with Ramsay Hunt on his own. He must be under the care of a physician, whether it's a neurologist or some other type of maybe an infectious disease physician feels comfortable making that diagnosis. Maybe they're seeing vesicles in the ear or in the mouth, or it's hard to really read the tea leaves of a video, of course.
Well, let me ask you, how does one reverse the paralysis? Is it a form of physical therapy? Is it amount of time taking its time and having to wait? What is it?
Well, there are a few things. With Ramsay Hunt, it's actually caused by a reactivation of the chickenpox virus, of the varicella virus. So you take an antiviral drug, whether it's acyclovir, or valacyclovir, or famciclovir, and so that's of number one importance. Second, sometimes steroids can help resolve the inflammation that's exacerbating some of the facial paralysis. And the third, of course, the most important, is time. It takes time to resolve, and it can take a few months sometimes.
Dr. Hotez, thank you. You've educated us on something that many people probably have not heard of. Thank you so much. And coming up, we'll have chilling new audio of the man authorities say showed up outside the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's home on a mission to kill.
Egypt is transitioning towards a sustainable, circular economy. Through the opening of the Gabal Al Asfar wastewater treatment plant, it is using treated water to irrigate agricultural land and is producing organic fertilizers. The plant has been designed to reduce waste and optimizes the use of water resources. It generates electricity and saves carbon emissions, ensuring that over 8 million people across the country live better, healthier lives.
this place we all belong.
If I have the opportunity to leave the world in a little bit better place than when I got here, then I'm kind of participating in that. So I think it's important, we're being the largest jewelry company out there in volume terms. We have a big role to play and show the way in the industry, and that's what we're doing. So it's not just the right thing to do, that's an important motivator personally, but it's also future-proofing our business, because I do think that at one point consumers will take note whether you're a socially responsible company. We can already see, of course, NGOs are pushing this agenda, but I can also see that the financial community is now starting to raise the bar and require companies that they invest in to have a proper attempt to do some work in the sustainability area.
Alex Jones.
Those thought patterns, the three presenters, QAnon group, or the anti-vaxxers, they all originate from Alex.
How much damage can one man do to school shooting victims?
Alex Jones lied about Sandy Hook.
And the country.
The people who listen to him believe the things that he says.
CNN asks those who know him.
He's not like you or me.
The truth doesn't really matter at all.
CNN Special Report, Megaphone for Conspiracy. Alex Jones, Monday on CNN.
Our mission here at CNN, the news comes first.
More breaking news that we are following right now. Welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
New audio of the California man charged with attempting to murder Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. The 26-year-old called 911 on himself because he didn't think he could get away with his plan and was considering killing himself.
Do you need medical attention?
I need psychiatric help.
Do you have access to any weapons?
Yes, I brought a firearm with me, but it's unloaded and locked in a case.
And you said you came from California. Do you know someone down here?
Brett Kavanaugh. Brett.
Rex.
The Supreme Court Justice.
It's the latest example of a member of the judiciary coming under threat, as Nick Watt shows us tonight.
Came from California, took a taxi from the airport to this location.
To Justice Brett Kavanaugh's home, carrying a Glock pistol and zip ties, says the FBI, planning to kill Kavanaugh. He found the address online.
The all nine justices are in danger because that information is out there.
According to the complaint, he was upset about the leak of a recent Supreme Court draft decision regarding the right to abortion. The public disclosure on 2nd of May prompted a significant increase in violent threats, reads a DHS memo circulated last month. Some of these threats described burning down or storming the US Supreme Court and murdering justices and their clerks. Abortion has long fueled fury. Since the Roe v. Wade decision nearly 50 years ago, anti-abortion extremists have carried out multiple bombings and murders. Now, the DHS, since the leak of that draft opinion that could overturn Roe v. Wade, also fears pro-abortion rights extremist violence. So there's now a high fence around the highest court in the land. And
last month, I accelerated the protection of all the justices' residences 24/7.
Threats against federal judges were already on the rise. In 2014, 768 threats and inappropriate communications against the judiciary, according to the U.S. Marshal Service, which protects federal judges. Last year, 4,511